So the rich man is in hell and Abraham is in heaven, but yet they're talking to each other. Meanwhile, there are texts in the Bible, especially Ecclesiastes chapter 9, verse 5 and 6, that tells us that the dead know not anything, that their memory is forgotten. Their memory is erased. Their love, their hatred, their jealousy is no more, it's perished. And that they have nothing to do with anything done under the sun. They can't communicate with the living. Is this a contradiction? Now, the parable of the rich man and Lazarus can be found in the book of Luke chapter 16, verse 19 through 31. But before we get into what this parable is not about, let's take a look at what it is about. You know, what we see in this parable is biblical historical racism. You have the Jews or the Jewish nation who consider themselves saved. And you have them looking at other non-Jews or Gentiles as lost. You have the Jewish nation that consider themselves clean, holy, upright. And you have them looking at other non-Jews or Gentiles as unclean, defiled, wicked. But the problem is that God needed them to see the Gentiles in a different light. God's second commandment says, love thy neighbor as thyself. But they wasn't getting it. Matter of fact, it took a long time for them to get it. Look at Acts chapter 10, verse 11 through 20. This is a story of where you have Peter, and there was a sheet that was let down from heaven. And Peter looked in the sheet and he saw creeping creatures and wild beasts. And he heard a voice. In verse 13 it says, and there came a voice to him, rise, Peter, and eat. Now Peter was like, no, I can't eat. We don't eat unclean things. Now, in verse 15 it says, and the voice spake unto him again the second time, what God hath cleansed, thou that call not thou common. Well, basically, what God has cleansed, don't call it uncleansed or dirty. And verse 16 tells us that this was done 3 times, and the vessel or the sheet was received up again into heaven. So 3 times this sheet came down, and 3 times Peter heard this voice saying, rise, Peter, kill and eat. And each time he denied it. We don't eat unclean things. So after this was done the 3rd time, the sheet went back up. Now Peter is sitting there really thinking, what in the world did that mean? Well, God had a plan. And God wasn't playing. God had a plan and God wasn't playing bars, right? Anyway, verse 19, God was very specific. Verse 19, while Peter thought on the vision, the Spirit said unto him, behold, 3 men seek thee. So it was at this moment that the connection was made between the sheet coming down 3 times and the 3 men that's coming to see him. So they explained why they were there, and they stayed the night. And early in the morning, Peter went with them to Cornelius' house. Cornelius was a centurion. And it says in verse 20, arise, therefore, get thee. Well, This is after God tells him that there are 3 men that they're coming looking for you. Verse 20 says, "Arise therefore and get thee down and go with them, doubting nothing, for I have sent them." Of course, Peter's going to go. So again, he invites them in, and early in the morning, they go on their way to Cornelius, the centurion's house. Now, when he gets to Cornelius's house, he finds the house full of people. And then Cornelius then tells him what happened. He tells him that he was in his house and he was fasting and praying. And then this man appeared to him dressed in white and told Cornelius, "The Lord has heard your prayers and your compassion is remembered. Your alms is remembered before the Lord." And then the man dressed in white told Cornelius, "Go send for Peter in Joppa, in the city of Joppa. He lives down by the sea. Fetch him. Tell him to come back here." So Cornelius did just that. He sent 3 men to go fetch Peter from Joppa. But knowing that Peter is going to come back with a word from the Lord, specifically for Cornelius. But he talked about it, and now he got a house full of people, and they're waiting. And again, they're waiting for Peter to come back. Now, again, initially Peter wouldn't have gone because in Peter's mind, and this is in Acts 10, this is far after Christ had descended up and went to heaven. There was this social gulf, this social divide between the Jews thinking they're clean and saved and thinking that the Gentiles are unclean and lost. So after Cornelius explains all of this to Peter, this is what Peter says in verse 28, Acts chapter 10, verse 28. And it says, "And he said unto them, ye know how that is it, ye know, and he said unto them, ye know how that it is an unlawful thing for a man that is a Jew to keep company or come unto one of another nation." So he's basically stating the current status of that social divide, that I call it racism, that existed. And it was supported by the law of the Jewish nation, because he says it's an unlawful thing for a man that is a Jew to keep company with someone that is of another nation. Unlawful means illegal. Then he says, "But God hath showed me that I should not call any man common or unclean." And so then Peter is there. So basically in Acts chapter 10, Peter gets the message. But the thing is, Peter just got the message. And the Jewish nation still don't have the message. Christ said his second commandment, love thy neighbor as thyself. There was so much disdain and distance put between the Jewish nations and the non-Jewish nations, the Gentiles. But because he said it's an unlawful thing for a man that is a Jew to keep company or come unto one of another nation. They didn't want to sit together. That was segregation. They didn't want to be in the same household. It was bad. And we living in America during the 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s know about it, right? But the Jewish nations, they thought, taught, and lived like only the Jews would be in the kingdom of heaven. And that everyone that was a non-Jew was basically going to hell. So what did Jesus do? Jesus basically flipped the script. He told the parable of the rich man and Lazarus, and it's basically reversing the role. So whereas the Jewish nations think they're going to always they're the only ones going to be in heaven, well, guess what? Jesus in the parable put them in hell. And where did the Gentiles go? Gentiles represented by Lazarus went to heaven. Now, consider this, right? Consider this. In this parable, Christ uses a man called Lazarus. Lazarus. But this isn't the Lazarus that he rose from the dead. So the rich man representing the Jewish nation, instead of being in heaven, he's in hell. Let's look at that. We got to look at that. Let's look at that. Matthew chapter 15, verse 22. And behold, a woman of Canaan came out of the same coast and cried unto him, saying, Have mercy on me, O Lord, thou son of David. My daughter is grievously vexed with the devil. But he answered her not a word. Now we're about to see that social divide, right? And his disciples came and besought him, saying, Send her away, for she cried after us. So this woman was in need. Her daughter is vexed with the devil. She goes to Christ. Christ doesn't say anything. And then the disciples come in talking about send her away. Verse 24. But he answered her and said, I am not sent but unto the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Then came she and worshipped him, saying, Lord, help me. And he answered and said, It is not meant to take the children's bread and to cast it to dogs. And she said, verse 27, Truth, Lord, that's true. Yet the dogs eat of the crumbs which fall from their master's table. And look what Christ says in verse 28. Then Jesus answered and said unto her, O woman, great is thy faith. This woman clearly was not a Jew. She was a Gentile. And the way they looked at Gentiles was that you don't even eat with us. It's not lawful for us to even eat with you. But she says that, yeah, but even the dogs, you see, you consider us, the Jewish nation consider us Gentiles as dogs. But even the dogs eat the crumbs from their master's table. They're there sniffing around. You know, you seen a dog underneath the table? They're just sniffing around and they're just looking for the crumbs. Now go to the rich man and Lazarus parable in Luke chapter 16, verse 21. And it says, And there was a certain beggar named Lazarus, which was laid at his gate full of sores, and desiring to be fed with the crumbs which fell from the rich man's table. The Lazarus that Jesus brought from the dead, who was dead for 4 days by the time he got there, that Lazarus was a Jew. The Lazarus in this parable, and again, look up on thesaurus.com, look up the word parable. It says a fable. It's a fake story. But what I'm saying on top of that, not in spite of that, on top of that, is that this Lazarus is represented as a Gentile, when in truth, the Lazarus that died and rose and Christ rose was a Jew. So if we're looking at this story with any type of feeling or thoughts that it's a real thing that happened, we can stop there. Now, when we look up the word Lazarus, when we look up the word Lazarus in the Greek, we see that this name can also mean Eleazar, which means whom God helps. And the definition in the concordance tells us that this name applies to two Israelites and one is imaginary. Lazarus. One is a name that belonged to two Israelites and one is imaginary. Why is one imaginary? Because one is a part of this fable, this parable in Luke chapter 16. So look at what we need to do, because it is a parable, Instead of focusing it that there's a dead man in hell talking to a dead man in heaven and believing that the dead can talk to each other after death, that's not the way we should be looking at it, because again, it's a parable, it's a fake story. So what does it mean, right? Let's look at this parable in Luke chapter 16, starting at verse 19. And there was a certain rich man which was clothed in purple and fine linen and fared sumptuously every day. And there was a certain beggar named Lazarus, which was laid at his gate full of sores, and desiring to be fed with the crumbs which fell from the rich man's table. Moreover, the dogs came and licked his sores. And it came to pass that the beggar died and was carried by the angels into Abraham's bosom. And the rich man also died and was buried. And in hell he lifted up his eyes, being in torments, and seeth Abraham afar off, and Lazarus in his bosom. Verse 24, and he cried and said, Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus, that he may dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am tormented in this flame. In addition to some of the other things that we said, as far as this not being a reality, a man is burning. He's on fire. Holding a casual conversation. Not real. Then, when we dip our finger in the water, we get that 1 or 2 drops of water. That is not going to cool the tongue of a man that's on fire. Again, this is a fake story. It's a fable. This is a parable. But there is a meaning to it. Verse 25, but Abraham said, Son, remember that thou in thy lifetime receivest thy good things, and likewise Lazarus evil things. I can't say Lazarus for some reason. And likewise Lazarus evil things. But now he is comforted, and thou art tormented. And besides all this, between us and you, there is a great gulf fixed. Talking about that gulf, right? Now, instead of it being a gulf between heaven and hell, it's a gulf in the social status between them two. So that they which pass from hence to you cannot, neither can they pass to us that would come from thence. There's that. It's a social divide, that biblical racism that existed, that the Jewish nation put in place that kept the Gentiles far, far at bay. Verse 27, then he said, I pray thee therefore, Father, that thou wouldest send him to my father's house, for I have 5 brethren, that he may testify unto them, lest they also come into this place of torment. And Abraham said unto him, they have Moses and the prophets. Let them hear them. And he said, Nay, Father Abraham, but if one went unto them from the dead, they would repent. And he said unto him, and Abraham said unto him, if they hear not Moses and the prophets, neither will they be persuaded, though one rose from the dead. So the irony in this, again, parable is that you have the Jewish nation in hell asking the Father to send someone from heaven, a representative from the dead, to his brothers so that they will repent and they won't have to deal with these flames, this torment, this pain. This request, it casts a reflection on God. One writer writes this. It was as if the rich man had said, if you had more thoroughly warned me, I wouldn't even be here. But Abraham's answer to him represented this. Your brothers have been sufficiently warned. Light has been given them, but they would not see. Truth has been presented to them, but they would not hear. Abraham says they have the writings of Moses and the prophets. Let them hear Moses and the prophets. That's all the warning they need. You're asking to send Lazarus from heaven, from the dead, and that they would believe. But there's a problem with that. And Abraham addressed it. He says in verse 31, and he said unto him, if they hear not Moses and the prophets, neither will they be persuaded, though one rose from the dead. There is so much truth in that particular verse right there. And this is why I say that. John chapter 12, verse 9 through 11. It reads, much people of the Jews therefore knew that he was there. And they came not for Jesus' sake only, but that they might see Lazarus also, whom he had raised from the dead. But the chief priests consulted that they might put Lazarus also to death, because that by him Lazarus, many of the Jews went away and believed on Jesus. Did you catch that? Did you catch that? There were people that were coming, not just for Jesus' sake, but they wanted to see Lazarus because they heard that Christ rose Lazarus from the dead. So they wanted to see Lazarus. So they go, and there is Lazarus. And he's there, and he's telling them, yeah, Jesus of Nazareth brought me from the dead. The chief priest is like, we got to do something about this. So they got together in the committee, consulted together, trying to discuss ways on how to kill Lazarus, who Christ had raised from the dead. Now, in the parable, the rich man, representing the Jewish nation, says, send Lazarus from the dead to my brothers. And when he testifies to them, I know that they will repent so they don't have to deal with this torment. He says, if they're not going to hear Moses and the prophets, they definitely not going to hear Lazarus. And you know why? Because y'all didn't. You and your brothers didn't. I sent Lazarus from the dead. I sent him. And you know what you and your brothers wanted to do? You wanted to kill him.